Um, just this is gonna be the first, video on my channel. Um, and I figured I'd just start with, a little background about me. Um, I work in the, financial sector, so it gives me kind of a lot of time to do research on certain topics that I feel pretty interested in. And so I figured when I have time, I might as well keep busy doing something that, I enjoy, looking up stuff and all that. So yeah, basically this channel just gonna be, whatever kind of piques my interest. I'm kind of gonna try and deep dive into, certain different topics. It doesn't, it can be inherently political or maybe not, just depending on what kind of interests me. Um, and so yeah, I basically got the idea to start this because I did, a ton of research into, as you can see on the screen, 9/11, um, and basically just, kind of got into it for a few months, and now I'm just kind of, starting it. So yeah, uh, that's uh, that's basically a little background. Hopefully in future videos I get a little bit more in depth on, stuff for about me or all that, but we'll see. So yeah, I'm gonna just start with a little introduction, just some background on the whole document. The theories that I go through, they have no specific order of importance. I just kind of listed out all of the most popular and, prevalent theories that I saw on the internet. Um, and yeah, I researched for as long as I could, but there's just no way to account for every single um, conspiracy theory that there is. I went through my documents, almost 8,000 words with, 60 plus sources. So I couldn't keep postponing, the video that I wanted to make. So um, I'm gonna just go with this, and then we'll see kind of um, if I have to, re-edit it or any of that. I just want to say, preface to when you do your own research after, hopefully after listening to this video, you do your own research on the topic. Be careful of the conspiracy theorists that have a large following. Um, a lot of them love to say that the onus is not on them, that they don't have to prove that their conspiracy is right, that we have to prove that they're wrong. This is just not a real it shouldn't be a real comment that you make about the whole thing. Um, they do have to prove the theory correct. That's why it's called a theory. That's literally the whole um, basis for what a theory is. You're trying to prove that your theory can work. Um, but yeah, I don't. There, it just doesn't make sense to hear that. And then also, whenever they say, these are questions that should be answered. If you hear that, that should be an immediate red flag for anyone that you're taking as a serious journalist or researcher on the topic, because tragedy happened 20 years ago, and there's tons of information out there. So all questions that should have been answered have been answered. There shouldn't be. I couldn't find any that I couldn't find an answer to. Um, so yeah, I want to just say that I don't think you know bad of people who believe in these conspiracy theories. I actually think there's a thing that's happening in the world where as the world rapidly changes, we kind of become complacent with the truth. Um, we'll start to look for conclusions where no information can be found because we couldn't possibly believe that simple answers are the reasons that we go through what we go through. But more often than not, it actually is the simple answer. That's the reason for things occurring. And so, yeah, just to end the introduction a little bit, I just wanted to preface that I did this whole document and this whole research just because I had asked my brothers, what they thought about the whole thing, and I realized that they all believed a bunch of the conspiracies that were out there. And I think the main problem that I saw with a lot that what they were telling me was that they didn't know pretty simple information about what occurred or all that. I know specifically one of them had said that there was only three planes when there was actually four, and I think that's a pretty big piece of information that you couldn't possibly have not known, especially if you're you know taking a side on believing a conspiracy or pushing a conspiracy. As you'll see in the research, a lot of these conspiracy theories are just based on like information that is completely not true, um, or just doesn't even have any way to prove. Like, yeah, it's just, I don't know. He had gotten angry and had said that I was just discrediting them because they couldn't recall information, but you should be able to recall the most important details of the thing, you know of anything that you're pushing a conspiracy theory on, because that's how would you believe a conspiracy if you don't even know the main basis of what is happening. But yeah, that's basically it for the introduction. So let's get into the just the first of many theories that I found. So yeah, to start, the first one I got is basically that Pentagon got hit on purpose, either as a government inside job or you know to get the government to be perceived as the culprit. Um, yeah, so like all theories, this one doesn't have any proof. I couldn't find any proof um, to believe that there would be some type of dark government, pulling the strings behind the scenes and making sure that one of the planes um, flew into the Pentagon on purpose. It's further expanded, in another section on why kind of these government cover-ups are kind of, odd. Um, I also think it's kind of ironic that people believe this, um, you know, that the Pentagon got hit on purpose. Um, like they always say that it's some super secret dark government that controls everything behind the shadows, but yet some random conspiracy theorists prove that it's the dark government out in the open. So it's kind of odd that those two things happen at once. And so yeah, basically this theory comes from a couple different reasons. One of them that I found was that people think the government did it because the casualties were so low in the Pentagon, meaning that they essentially evacuated before being hit because they had the information beforehand. Um, this is just kind of easily explainable. Um, there was 189, Pentagon workers that died the day of the attack, which I doubt many conspiracy theorists would even be able to recite. And basically, the number's so low because that entire wing of the Pentagon that got hit was being renovated at the time. You know, it's known as Wedge 3 of the Pentagon, which had total 4,500 workers, but only about 800 had moved back into the renovated offices at the time of 9/11. Um, and, the renovations that had been done to the Pentagon were specifically for fire resistance and sprinkler improvements, which would have further helped to lower any casualty numbers. Yeah, I have a link right there to the American Society of Civil Engineering, highlighting that it had been being renovated. Um, so yeah, there's also another part of the theory is that people think that the specific area of the Pentagon that got hit is proof because it was I believe the budget office, and that they were hiding funds. So now, in order to hide that they hid funds, they purposely hid their own location, which just sounds weird to even say out loud. Basically, I would argue that if it had hit anywhere in the Pentagon, the theory would have changed. You know, they could have hit somewhere that was, more aligned with intelligence, and it would have been, oh, they were trying to hide intelligence, or could have been maybe like a weapons development or weapons something having to do with military weaponry, and it would have been, oh, they were hiding secret weapons. It's just this isn't really a good um, argument, and I know they get it specifically because they get it from this missing funds statement. So, you know, the Secretary of Defense at the time, Donald Rumsfeld, the day before did make a comment about missing funds. So he revealed a loss of, and I loss in quotation marks, of $2.3 trillion the day before 9/11. Um, I have a Reuters link to the to that comment. He did make the comment the day before. There's no doubt about that. Um, but he had also made that comment, months prior. According to an audit report, which is number 3 in the links below, this had been known at least at the earliest in February of 2000. It was pretty common. I know most people don't even know how general ledgers work, let alone audit trails. But just to put it simply, the software at the time for the Pentagon didn't communicate well with other government bodies. So like the FBI, CIA, all of them couldn't really um, communicate really that well. And so when they say 2.3 trillion being lost, it really just means that they couldn't trace back the book item, if that makes sense. Like it's not that this was $2.3 trillion in cash money that was stolen from the Pentagon and used for nefarious details, and they purposely hit the Pentagon to hide it. This isn't what happened. This is just they were trying to track down what exact transactions were associated with the 2.3 trillion. But yeah, I mean, it was the early 2000s. Technology isn't what it is today. We still have tech problems communicating with different bodies of the government. This is not nothing new. We see this often. Um, a third reason why they think the Pentagon got hit on purpose as well is that for some reason they believe that some stools and papers weren't burned, which proves that it was a missile or a rocket, not an actual plane. Um, I put a picture in there, of the photos released by the FBI and all the government. It definitely shows fire damage. I don't know what they're talking about, and you know, I don't know where the stools and papers even make sense as an argument because, like I said, they were doing sprinkler and fireproofing renovations, so at some point the fires in the go out, so not everything will be burnt to a crisp. Uh, but yeah, I argue, even if it was a rocket, wouldn't it still burn the papers? Like, wouldn't they have been blown away or something, or the stool had been knocked over? I don't really know how this proves that it was an inside job or a missile. Um, yeah, the fourth thing on this one is that people say that there's no footage of the Pentagon being hit, so it must have been a staged attack. They're right. There was not extensive footage of the attack, but it's the Pentagon. It's one of the most secure places on the planet. You can't just have cameras rolling everywhere where someone could get access or any of that. But there was some footage. I linked a video there. It would be number 5 on the sources right here. And yeah, it's a wiki link, but it's really, you know, I used Wikipedia only because I didn't want to download document. Uh, but it was originally posted, by judicialwatch.org, and it was accessed via the Wayback Machine. So you can go ahead and watch it. The cameras are old, so you won't really see it perfectly. But yeah, be my guest. Uh, yeah, the number five for this one is that the hole is too small for a plane, so it must have been a missile or rocket, deployed by the U.S. military. Just, you know, I don't even know how theorists can claim this seriously, but the plane that hit the Pentagon was actually a 757 and not the 767, so it was a smaller plane, which accounts for the hole. And even with that, the hole is still massive. I mean, it's the size of a plane. It's a big hole. I don't know what they mean by too small for a plane. I don't know how they got that um, judgment, but I mean, if they're saying it's not a plane, then how do all the passengers die? And how do you explain that to their family? We would need some type of evidence for that. Um, but yeah, um, yeah. Also, they say it couldn't have been a rocket for because it created. Oh, I'm saying it couldn't have been a rocket because rockets would have created less fires, and there was pretty big fires as you can see in this photo right here. I mean, it's a raging fire. It's caused by the jet fuel from a plane. That's what happens, and even the you know reports, all the reports prove that it happened. But yeah, this link number 8, if you want to, there's tons of images there, so be my guest to kind of check those out. So yeah, my next theory that they have is that the U.S. government had known the attacks were coming beforehand. This one, I'm gonna explain one part of it. Um, Initially, there's more later on in the video, um, where I can go. I do go more into detail on debunking kind of this theory that they knew beforehand. Initially, I have found that a lot of theorists would push this idea because of a presidential report that Bush had received prior to 9/11. Um, this report, which I linked right there on number 9, um, basically, they use this as a reason to say that Bush had known previously about the 9/11 about to happen. This isn't true. The report, which is titled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S. and is dated August 1st, 2001, which was then declassified in April of 2004. Um, at the time, it was obvious that he wanted to hit the U.S. on U.S. soil. He had hit embassies across the planet at this time. That he had already taken credit for a previous terror attack in New York at the World Trade Center prior. And the report specifically states this, and they know this, and it says that there's 70 ongoing investigations at the time. So I don't know how this is used as a proof that they knew it was beforehand. They didn't know exactly what the plan was. They knew he wanted to attack them, but you can't, you know, you can't block everything. It's not possible. Um, I tried to explain this to my brothers as well, because they had brought this up, and I had told them that it wasn't true, and then one of my brothers had tried to say that it was like the U.S. knowing that Pearl Harbor was going to be hit beforehand. I couldn't really refute it then because I didn't know too much about, prior knowledge to Pearl Harbor, but after looking it up, it's basically the same thing. We had known during World War II that Japan was likely to attack us, but we were more alert on Asian, like attacking us at some of our Asian, outposts and all that, and it ended up being Pearl Harbor, which we just couldn't account for every location. And this is what I was trying to explain to them that day is that, the CIA, FBI, and NSA get so much information on a daily basis that it's almost impossible to garner which one's correct or which one's true or has weight to it. So, yeah, I mean, this one, at least for this part, it doesn't make too much sense using that report as your proof. So, number 3, I have titled, U.S. government worked with the terrorists to plan and execute attacks. So this goes along with the prior knowledge of the government one. Um, but yeah, just to start, all 19 of the terrorists were specifically connected to Al Qaeda and having been from Saudi Arabia. Um, I couldn't find any evidence that the government was ever connected to them in any way. In fact, I think the opposite is true. Um, Obviously, because it was a terror attack. Any theorist who believes this would need to give me some form of evidence proving that they were, CIA assets or some type of information that was actually credible, proving that they were working with the government. Um, yeah, I think this one mainly stems from people initially believing that bin Laden was a CIA asset, which I think I have to, break down first. This is basically a theory that bin Laden had previously worked with the CIA and was an asset prior to the 9/11 attacks. Um, you know, I'm fairly confident that that believe this, most of them don't actually know in what way he would be characterized or, more accurately, mischaracterized as an asset. But I'll give some context. So basically, this theory comes from a misinterpretation or misunderstanding of, an Afghan operation by the CIA known as Operation Cyclone. This is basically a CIA program which financed and trained Afghan Mujahideen soldiers in the 80s and early 90s. Uh, number 10 right here shows you an excerpt from a book written by Steve Cole. Um, he is I believe, a CIA officer during the time. Uh, I may be wrong. I'd have to recheck that. Maybe he was an FBI. Um, but yeah, I'll get back to get to that. But he writes that there's basically no evidence to prove that the CIA actually had contact with Bin Laden at the time, who was funding his own movement in Afghanistan to support the Afghani rebels against the Soviets. Once the Soviets withdrew, he formed Al Qaeda, which there's also a link to one of these links, 11, um, 10 and 11, I believe, are the links, which he formed circa 1988. He did have a close relationship with a Mujahideen commander who later joined the Taliban. Um, and that person was assisted by the US and MI6. So theorists will say because he was friends with this guy, then bin Laden is also by proxy a CIA asset. All the way up until 2001 is what they're claiming, or after, presumably. Um, this would also mean that any and all attacks from the early 90s to now would all be linked to the US government. So you'd have to give proof on each and every one and connect the strings. Um, and upon looking it up, several historians, most historians, kind of come to the consensus that any Saudi freedom fighters who were fighting at Afghanistan at the time, which bin Laden would have been included in this as he's a Saudi, he's a Saudi born citizen. They were kind of seen as secondhand during, the rebellion. And they had relationships, but it wasn't as close as people like to assume. Because this was an Afghan problem, it wasn't so much a Saudi problem. Um, but yeah, just to get that there. I think there's also a big conspiracy, and this is specifically in connection with the Tucker Carlson videos that I mentioned before. They like to point out that the CIA director at the time, who's John Brennan, his name was John Brennan. Um, They like to make the claim that he worked against law enforcement to find the hijackers before 9/11. This is their big smoking gun to prove that there was government conspiracy. But yeah, just some background. He was the director of the CIA, and he oversaw Alex Station, which was a Bin Laden issue station formed by the CIA. It was created in 1996 to focus on tracking him. Um, and just to preface this, it was a CIA base, but there were FBI agents during and participating the entire time. Um, but yeah, so basically, Tucker Carlson, he uses the interview by this guy named Mark Rosini, and he's used by basically all conspiracy theorists at this point to prove that there was government involvement. Um, the guy says that he was an FBI operative who worked on tracking Bin Laden, and he was connected. And he claims that the CIA knew that the two hijackers had entered America with U.S. visas, but didn't share the information with the FBI when the visas became known. Um, Most of what he claims is refuted in an Inspector General report. Um, you know, Multiple FBI agents had already had that exact information he's claiming that only the CIA knew and the NSA knew. Um, there is a link to a PDF. Um, it's one of these links. Sorry, there's just so many links that I would have to, go through. It would be page 251 and then pages 365 to 366 of the Inspector General report. Um, it highlights it basically highlights key performances done by FBI and CIA agents who basically didn't do their job well enough with the information they had. And the report, he's claiming that there was a report written by an FBI operative about the visas and knowing ahead of time, and that the CIA blocked it and never pushed it forward. It's known as the CIR report. The FBI agent who he knows goes by Doug, but is listed as Dwight on the Inspector General report to hide an identity. Um, the guy literally admits that um, he forgot about the document entirely after it got kind of shot down because it wasn't approved to be sent to higher command. Um, but like, not only did he forget that he wrote it, other FBI agents had read the letter and they did nothing. So this is more of a government being inept problem than a government being inept problem. Um, the Inspector General concludes that the CIA did not adequately address the letter, um, but the FBI agent also didn't follow up with the information enough, so he was at fault as well. And I don't want to attack this person, Mark Rossini, specifically, but you know, I don't want to pull in other information, but this is also the man who resigned from the FBI for giving out records to a lawyer without consent, and more recently, I believe in 2025, he was just found guilty of bribery, for fraud in Puerto Rico. So I don't know if he's very reliable as an interviewee at this point, if he's willing to do those things. And just some more information. I mean, in Carlson's video, he just blatantly lies about Brennan being in charge of the Saudi consulate. When the hijackers were given the visas, he worked in the consulate in 1996, and in 99 he had already left. And these two terrorists who had gotten the visas had received the visas after the Al Qaeda summit in Malaysia, which was in 2000. So he was no longer part of the Saudi consulate. Um, but yeah, you can read the Inspector General report. It's 449 pages, so good luck with that. It's pretty long. But yeah, that's basically the findings. Is what I told you. Here's the little excerpt of this, report. You know, systemic problems included inadequate oversight and guidance provided to FBI detainees at the CIA. FBI employees' lack of understanding of CIA procedures. It's just it was inept workers basically. Our review also found that the CIA did not provide information to the FBI about Hazmi and Midhar when it should have, and we believe the CIA shares significant responsibility for the breakdown. However, the FBI also failed to fully exploit the information that was made available to them. So this is just, making my point that it was kind of both people. It was both entities' fault. It wasn't, some grand conspiracy. Um, and another thing that they'd like to claim as well, especially in the Tucker Carlson video, that it was a false flag operation. Um, he basically uses a recent interview from the then at the time the counterterrorism czar Richard Clarke. Um, Richard Clarke, basically is now claiming that it was a false flag, specifically in reference to Al Bayoumi, which was associate of the hijackers who basically gave them place to stay and kind of transported them while they were in the states. Just to preface, there's basically no sources to any of the Tucker Carlson information, so any excerpt that he shows online and all that, you'd be hard pressed to find the source, and then I would question the, you know, other information that's listed as part of the source. But yeah, I hate to attack his interviewee once again, or not his interviewee, but the person that he's using as his, proof for a conspiracy. But Richard Clarke at this point is just, an egregious liar, if I had to put it bluntly. In 2004, he did a 60-minute interview praising the CIA director at the time. And then all of a sudden in 2011, as he's releasing a docu-series that he's putting out, he claims it's a false flag operation set up by this said CIA director, George Tenet. So I just find it hard to take it seriously when this is the type of people that they're relying on for their conspiracies. You know, from what I researched, there's no concrete evidence that Al Bayoumi was directly affiliated with the Saudi government. Um, there's a link below to Operation Encore, which was declassified in 2012. Basically, a 28-page report that highlights some findings the FBI had in connection with him. I believe Operation Encore would be link number. I'd have to. It would be link number the Wilsons, so 11. Um, yeah. Although he seems suspicious, that he had some type of link to because he had a link to a Saudi consulate worker. There was never anyone who came outright or any evidence outright to show he was a Saudi asset specifically. In fact, it seems more likely that he was just a terrorist who had managed to be embedded in the consulate, if anything. Um, the PDF shows phone records of the consulate worker being in contact with future terrorists. In my opinion, this Al Bayoumi likely knew about the attacks prior, but he was more of a middleman than anything. He wasn't some government issued Saudi backed guy. You know, they try to use the notebook that he had pictures of the plane, but that would just prove his involvement in the attack. It wouldn't have proved that he's a government asset. And they couldn't get him on that at all because he could have used an argument that he worked as at an aviation company for doing those type of calculations on his notebook. So I find it hard to believe it. And they also try to say that he received money from a Saudi ambassador, so he must have worked for the Saudi government. In reality, he actually received the money from a Saudi prince, actually the wife of a prince. It would have been Bandar bin Sultan's wife, his wife Haifa, and she was actually sending money to the associate, um, an associate who happened to be also a terrorist who was in the country named Osama Basan. She was sending the money to this Basan's wife. In total, it was 73 grand, which is pretty small considering they're trying to, you know, run a large government conspiracy to topple the U.S. government at this point. I'm not really sure how they connect them, but yeah, basically they paid 73 grand. Al Bayoumi's wife kept some of the payments, about three of them. And, obviously this looks like a Saudi prince is paying the terrorists directly, but it isn't. Like, if you know anything about the Muslim faith, they have a thing commonly known as zakat, or zakat is one of the five pillars of Islam, meaning charity giving. It's super commonplace for royals in Saudi Arabia, to give to less fortunate um, Muslim immigrants that are across, overseas and all that. Um, just some information. The U.S. A UN article from 2012 estimated that there's like 200 billion to $1 trillion generated each year from charity giving, Islamic charity giving, and it's also mandatory in Saudi Arabia to do so, where they're required to donate roughly 2.5% of their wealth each year. So yeah, I mean, it's just like I don't really know, um, what they're trying to get at. With that, the both of the prince and his wife denied having any connection to the hijackers or knowing beforehand they had just sent this money that happened to be connected to them. Um, they went back to America after that and closed their accounts there. And I know that it sounds a certain way when you hear Saudi royal, but any conspiracy theorists, you should immediately question them. Well, how many Saudi royals do you think there are? Because when they hear and say Saudi royal, you assume that it's going to be some, high up member, but there's multiple thousands of royals. There's actually estimated around 15,000 members of the royal family, and the wealth is only held by around two. So it's pretty large number of people you could mean by Saudi royals. So yeah, I mean, in addition, there's also, a journal written by one of the hijackers, Muhammad Atta, which, gave insight into the type of people the hijackers were. They were all very religious, hardcore, Muslim to the bone, and did not like any non-traditional beliefs. He also wrote a will before the hijackings, which also gave them insight into their thinking. And then, there was also a terrorist who did not participate, Zakaris Musai, who pled guilty to conspiracy to commit terrorism. At first he denied it, but information came out that he was connected. Not only did he admit he was planning another attack, but the architect of the attack, who was named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, knew him and said he interviewed him to be part of it, but left him out. You know, he even admitted that he was linked to Al Qaeda. Um, there's phone calls and messages to prove that they're connected. Uh, you can go look these up if you want. I can't give any more proof. Osama even claimed the 19 terrorists. He claimed that they were part of Al Qaeda, and he even claimed the 93 attacks. So I don't know how this got to this level of conspiracy, but yeah, that's basically it. I'll go into number four here as well because it kind of ties in. It's just that the terrorists are framed, so they're patsies. If you think they're framed, then you'd have to prove how the government did it. Um, not only how the government did it, but you'd have to have info on showing that the government did it. And I'm not sure how they would have framed them if there's so much evidence proving that Al Qaeda was involved. And why would bin Laden take credit for attacks if they were framed? It just doesn't really make sense too much, but yeah. So yeah, on to the fifth one. Um, this one's titled U.S. Government Moved Passengers on Flight 93, then shot it down. Slash, Flight 93 is fake. Um, the Flight 93, for a little background, for those who don't know, is the plane that was headed for the White House but was taken down. The passengers actually revolted on this one, and it went down in I believe, the forests of Pennsylvania or the plains, something like that. It went down in Pennsylvania. Um, but yeah, this one basically comes from part of it comes from a conspiracy that you know at the time Dick Cheney, who was Bush's vice president, gave an order to shoot down the planes. You know, this this plane was in the air after the towers fell, and they knew that there was a plane on the way to D.C. where the vice president was. He made the call to take down the planes, and the fighter jets did go into the air, but um, the fighter jets that took off never actually made it in time to see the plane. The plane had already went down, and the passengers fought back and they hit the ground. But additionally, people think they shot it down, but the planes were completely unarmed. And there's actually an interview, which is number 27, this link right here, to an interview done by the pilots. The pilots literally say outright that the planes were unarmed and that they were going to ram them and basically give their lives to get the plane down because that was what was ordered to do. Uh, but yeah, so it was not shot down. This is not a thing. Um, they also say that the debris was I read on a couple of the conspiracies that the debris was too spread out, so it must have been a rocket to blow it up. Um, it's kind of unfathomable to say that the debris was too far. I'm not sure what plane crash where there would be debris super, in one little area. Um, but I question it because if it was shot down by a missile, wouldn't the debris be more spread out than a plane crash would be? Like it doesn't really logically make sense there. And theorists will have to prove that they were shot down and kind of refute all the testimonies made by family members, and all that when they receive calls. Um, there's also some really weird conspiracy that the planes had missiles on them. Here's the kind of the picture that they post a lot to say, look, that's a missile. This looks like a missile, but it's definitely just a fuselage. There's no rockets on this plane, but yeah, it's just this one's a little pretty outlandish. It's almost comical too. So number 6 is probably going to be the longest section, I'd assume. This section is titled "Jet Fuel Doesn't Melt Steel Beams," which is, kind of I'm joking about it, but it is what most people believe. This is the most prominent theory proving that the government did it. So, just to start, they're entirely right. Jet fuel, in fact, cannot melt steel beams, but that means change to its liquid form, which would mean melt, meaning molten metal. You know, everywhere I could find estimates range, depending on the alloy and the specific makeup of the type of steel, but according to most metal experts and even servicesteel.org, which is the link that or the company that I was using my estimate for, the general consensus is that around 2500 to 2700 degrees Fahrenheit is needed in order to completely melt steel alloys. Although this is the case, According to the American Institute of Steel Construction, 50% of the strength of steel is lost once it reaches temperatures of around 1,000 to about 12,000 or 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. So, according to the NIST report, there were fires in certain areas of both World Trade Center 1 and World Trade Center 2, which are towers, that got to at least 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. At this temperature alone, the steel would likely lose 90% of its strength. So, just to be clear, the fires which were caused by the plane crashes heated up the steel so hot that it lost its structural integrity. And once the steel loses its structural integrity, all of the weight from the building has to go somewhere. So I linked a YouTube video. It would be number 30 below. Um, it's a metalworker guy. He shows how easy it is to heat up steel and to bend it. And this is just thin, normal steel. Um, I can't believe this is the most prevalent theory, honestly. It's a little disappointing. But yeah. Um, Not only did, the fires decrease the strength of the beams, but the actual crash itself, took out for both towers a lot of the perimeter beams, which, yeah, I mean, if you take off the weight from the outside, where's the weight going to go? Towards the middle. That's just normal physics. Um, and, as the outside beams continued to give because of the heat and the shifting in weight, it just became too much to handle and all the building toppled, into itself. I genuinely can't understand why this is so hard to believe that it's possible. Um, if weight is distributed to the center, that's where the weight is going to go. It wouldn't tip randomly if the weight's not leaning. That's not what happens. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not really sure. Basically, the main theory is that it's a controlled explosion. So the way I'm looking to debunk this is basically if you look at any controlled demolition, the sound, not only the sound of the explosives going off, are one thing that's different, but the actual drop of the building is widely different. I linked a YouTube video below. It would be number 31. It was a recent controlled explosion for Capital One building in Louisiana. You can hear each and every one of the explosions in order, and you can see each explosion happening so that the whole building just falls straight down. You know, the towers are nothing even remotely close to that. Like, I also linked one down there, the one below it. So number 31 is the Capital One, and then 32 is the tower actual falling, and it's nowhere near similar. Like, I think a lot of people haven't really seen the tower fall to understand the difference um, between them, but it's night and day the difference between a controlled explosion and what happened that day. Um, but yeah, like it's just even from the debris to the absolute, just everything was just different. It's Yeah, I don't. And even if it was controlled explosives, how would the plane not have set off every single one? Why would it have taken some time for the towers to fall? I don't understand how that would be possible. And theorists will just be like, well, it's the government. That's not a good argument. That's dumb. In addition to the fires and the structural integrity, the beams themselves were also just steel encased in fireproof foam. So, like other, you know, buildings, commercial high rises, it's not like concrete surrounding a steel pillar. This was just wide open steel beams, fireproof. And, the fireproofing is kind of what led to the demise too, is that, the blazing fires kept going, and then on bottom floors where the heat started to rise, the insulation kept the heat in the beams and, lowered the integrity. It's just how it happened. I'll talk about it next. This is the next number, but this is exactly the same as Building 7. which is one of the major conspiracies as well, why people think it's an inside job. But if you can understand that heat makes metal weak, it's pretty easy to imagine another building falling. Um, Especially Building 7, which was just as large as the other ones. But most people don't even know that. But yeah, just also to reiterate, the jet fuel is what caused the fires, but jet fuel burned away pretty quickly. What happened was all of the office furniture and supplies and everything acted as fuel for a raging fire that was on multiple floors to just grow and grow and grow. And then, you know, do what it did. Yeah. And then people point at little puffs of explosions as proof of of an inside job, and it's just that's pretty sad to think about. Like if you look at a fire, little things. If you throw a bottle into a fire, what does the bottle do? It puffs and explodes. If you throw things into a fire, they're gonna puff and explode. So it was likely just office machinery, office equipment, just giving off a little explosion. It's not unthinkable to think that it was just the fires and the weight that brought the towers down. These buildings were never, no building has ever been engineered to take a plane hit, let alone two buildings at the same time. It's just, yeah. This jet fuel melt steel beams is probably the saddest one. Not saddest one, but most, easily debunked ones, sadly. But yeah, so number 7 is aptly titled Building 7. So I'm pretty sure all of you have heard Building 7. Or I guess I'm not pretty sure all of you have heard. Maybe at some point in your life you've heard of Building 7. It's basically Building 7, as you can see from the picture. So these were the two towers, 1 and 2. And there were also other World Trade Center buildings. And Building 7 was the third largest building of the complex, and it was located over here. So basically, people believe that Building 7's collapse is proof that it was government involvement, either by controlled explosives or thermite, or whatever conspiracy theory they have for it falling. Um, just because it wasn't directly hit by the plane, it still toppled. Um, Normal science and proof of the day and video show that the building caught fire and was on fire for several hours until it finally collapsed. And, I don't understand why the theorists think that you have to have the building to, or they have to have the plane hit the building for the building to fall. Buildings can fall without a plane crash. That's happened before. Um, but yeah, just to reiterate off the last one, basically, temperatures in Building 7 they were lower um, than the other ones, than the towers. The NIST report says that certain points of the building got to about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, but like I said, even at that temperature, steel will still expand. So as the heat increased, the steel expanded, and then the bolts where they connected, connection points, all of them lost their strength because if your heat is expanding, then it doesn't grip onto points of contact to other steel beams, and you lose your structural integrity. That's what happens with heat. This is normal physics. Um, but yeah, there's a couple other conspiracies. People think that the Building 7 had fireproofing, so it must have been an inside job to topple because there was a sprinkler system and it was working, and that this is proof. This is also a lie. It did have a sprinkler system. I'm sure no theorist knows how it works, but um, the system did work that day. So the bottom 20 floors were connected to the water mains in the city, which were destroyed by the fucking tower that fell. So The bottom floors had no protection from the fire. The top floors did have some protection, and they did work. They had two large water tanks, uh, um, and the two large water tanks worked up until they didn't, and the backup was the water main. And when the water main's gone and there's no water in the water tanks, the fire raged on. Um, it's just I don't understand it too because there's so many things that could have gone wrong with the building, or not gone wrong with the building, but there's so many reasons why the fires could have toppled it. Like there was also five diesel storage tanks on the building with 42,000 gallons of diesel, which were fuel for backup generators. And this diesel also burned, weakening the building. So yeah, it's just this is a part of the NIST report. Also, I linked, so it'll be link number one of these links right here. Uh, but yeah, here's kind of the pictures, so you can get a visual. 1, 2, 7, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's 5 and 7's over here. But yeah, this is just for some background. Um, there's also a theory that the BBC knew the building fell before, so it must be the UK or US working with the UK since they already knew it, apparently. This is so ridiculous of a theory. The reporter in the video that they use is literally standing in front of the the building, and it is just a misline. Um, they knew it was on fire for several hours, and they knew it was already fully evacuated, and they knew it was going to fall. The building fell at 5:20, and the reporter said it had fallen at 4:54, so 20 minutes early. Um, I don't know why this is used as a point. There's also like for some reason people think that only the two towers and the building 7 were harmed because they're the only ones that fell, and it's just ridiculous. Like this link, you can see other stuff, but I linked pictures. I mean, the level of destruction for the whole area was massive. I mean, if you ask any New Yorker who was alive at the time and who saw it, this was like destruction they hadn't seen. This is an unknown destruction. Every single building in the World Trade Center got damaged. You know, Even the ones that didn't fall, 3, 4, 5, and 6, they all suffered severe damage. So there's no grand conspiracy that they only toppled 3 buildings. Every building, got damaged. This isn't a thing. Um, and then people think that how come the other buildings didn't fall? Well, they were like significantly smaller. Look, the two towers were 110 stories both. Building 7 was, I believe, 40. I believe it was 40 stories. Um, but yeah, World Trade Center 3 was 22. You have 9. World Trade Center 6, which I believe is somewhere over here, is only 7 stories. These are all smaller buildings than the other ones. Of course, the smaller buildings are less likely to topple. There's less weight to collapse. But even then, they still had damage where parts of the buildings collapsed from the damage. It's no, but this is all a complete like lie about what happened that day. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's just sad. This one's a little worse. I could go into more detail on Building 7, but it's the same as the other ones. They're still high temperature causes steel to fail. This is what happens. So Building 7 could have fallen, not could have, did fall because of the same reasons that the towers fell. Is essentially what I'm getting at. So yeah, now we're on number 8. Number 8 I titled Molten Metal. must mean that thermite was used to melt the support beams, which in turn basically means the government melted the support on purpose. Um, people use burning metal, or I guess melted metal, and think it's thermite that caused this, and the metal must be steel beams because only the thermite could have melted the steel. I don't know how they get to that point, but they do. Um, yeah, I mean, any molten metal that's on video or testimony is definitely a softer metal, no doubt. Um, it's almost it's almost entirely likely that it's probably the aluminum, either from the plane or from office equipment, because aluminum melts at around 800 to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be within the range for the temperatures of the two towers. So yeah, I go more into detail later on for the thermite, but yeah, we'll just leave number 8 at that. I linked some like melting points of steel and all that from like number 38 to I don't know, and 38 and on. But yeah. So then I'll just go right into number 9. Um, these are shorter ones, so passport of one of the hijackers was still there, so the government must have planted the passport. People use this theory as proof that it must have been a conspiracy. One of the attackers, so Satam al-Sukami, his passport was found after the towers fell by, I believe, a bystander, and it was on one of the sidewalks. I mean, if you look at plane crashes, it's not super uncommon for papers to be left behind, so I don't know why this is like a prominent theory. Also, if the government planned the attacks, why would they plant? I guess to blame them, but wouldn't it be better to just keep the least amount of information as possible out there? Like they wouldn't gain anything by planning it. Um, like they would have found out the identities either way. So planning it seems like a stupid thing to do if you're the one who did it on purpose. But yeah, okay, whatever. Um, I'll go just right on to number 10 as well. Number 10 is I titled it "No planes were used in any attacks." This is basically just a theory that's saying that planes were not used at all. Um, I'm not really sure why this one's a thing, but it is. So I linked multiple phone calls by different types of passengers. All of them have been released. So the first one I have, so 45, 46, 47 are all links to either testimony or recordings of passengers who had made calls. First one's Betty Young. She was a stewardess on one of the flights. The second one, her name was Nydia Gonzalez. She wasn't on the flights, but she was a specialist, operational specialist for American Airlines, and she actually put out a statement at the commission. And then the third one, number 47 link right here, is Peter Hansen. So he was on one of the flights, and they heard his last moments basically. You can go and listen to them. They're pretty stark. So this one, no planes were used in attacks. Pretty sad one to believe in. Um, there's also I linked to one. This seems to be a prominent one that people bring up. This Daniel Mark Lewin. I think people bring it up mostly because he was a like tech guy. Um, who was had Israeli background, and people want it to be Israel real bad, especially right now how our political climate is. I I could talk about him more. I don't know if it really needs to. I don't understand conspiracy theorists when they think that it was some Israeli, you know, cause. Why would you have this guy on the flight? Because he's a, tech entrepreneur. former IDF soldier. It doesn't make sense to have him die in the flight. So this is, yeah, this one's just, these are all just bad. Um, Bad reasons, and that's why I'm listing them here, because you have to prove that these are fake. Um, there's also tons of flight control recordings, and there were recordings of terrorists. Um, I actually, this picture as well, I included it because there's an ongoing theory also that it must have been a cargo plane, since no windows could be seen in any of the videos. Um, I mean, the videos were captured on like early 2000s video, and the planes were really high. It's probably hard to see the actual windows, but there's some debris. Um, they were definitely there. There's definitely regular commercial airplanes. There's tons of recordings and eyewitness reports saying it was a regular passenger plane. So I don't know how you get through that one and prove that wrong. But I guess be my guest for you conspiracy theorists. This next one's short too as well. Um, my number 11, I titled it Deepfake, which apparently there's a conspiracy that it was all a deep fake. None of it was real, which um, I don't really know how to handle this one. It seems outrageous to me to even, uh, you know, to even um, take seriously. I don't know how you get the deepfake, but uh, just a little note too as well on that last deepfake one. Um, I also had a note that the deepfake mostly comes because people really inspect the camera, like capturings of the explosions. Like I said, the cameras weren't good, so it's hard to see not only windows but also the moment of impact for the explosion. Like the explosion didn't happen before the impact of the plane. It's just the camera resolution is bad, so it appears that way. But it's not. That's not what happened. So yeah, just a little note on that one. Number 12, which I have titled Insurance Money slash Precious Metals Theory. This is a two for one. There's ongoing theory that people think it was an inside job because the owner insured the property or wanted insurance proceeds for the property, either or. Firstly, the property, people get the owner wrong. The property was owned by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, but was leased by Larry Silverstein's company. Um, so Silverstein's property. So it was not being insured by the owner, but the entity that was leasing it, or the person that was leasing it. So that's a big error that a lot of people I've seen do that. Um, although he didn't technically own it, he operated them and was responsible for them. And he had signed a 99-year lease for $3.2 billion on July 24th, 2001. So a few months before the attack. Um, I think this one mainly it comes under scrutiny because there was not only was there a terrorism insurance policy in there, um, that people say, well, if they had that, they must have known beforehand that it was going to be attacked. The only answer I can give you this clear as day for that is there was already a bombing in 1993 at the World Trade Center, so it was probably non-negotiable to have that, and I doubt any large-scale commercial real estate in New York doesn't have that as a requirement for insurance policies. Um, but yeah, it it's just, yeah, that's a crazy take. And people also believe that there was some insane insurance payoff for the property, and that's just kind of not true. I don't think people realize just how expensive these properties were. This was the most expensive real estate on the planet at the time. So Silverstein after they had following the attacks, tried to get two payments for both of them. You know, claiming that they were each their own occurrence and that each should be represented as such. He wanted 7.1 billion, which he didn't get. Um, a court record proved that it was one occurrence, so he didn't get the 7.1 billion that he initially wanted, but he was given extra money. He was only insured for 3.5 billion in damage, but got a settlement for 4.57. So people think that that's a reason, but this amount doesn't even cover the total cost of rebuilding. Um, in 2003, the total was estimated at 10 billion. So that's this CNN or one of these links here. Here's the bombing, and then here's the Port Authority. Here's some insurance, construction, about 10 billion. There it is. Number 55 is the link. Um, yeah, it's just if it costed 10 billion to rebuild and it's 4.5 billion payout, then he lost money if he was in on it, right? It doesn't really make sense to do this to the world's most expensive place on earth. I mean, the property had the third largest mall in America at the time and the best restaurant in the world. So it seems like a pretty big price for, you know, not getting your money back basically. So this is just a bad theory in general. And then the precious metals is pretty small. So there was gold in precious metal. People think it was like tons of money, but I linked a CNN article, which is this CNN article, number 51. Uh, it's the total amount of gold and precious metal was 254 million, which is honestly just peanuts. And I use this argument more than once. Later on, there's a point on asbestos costs that people use as a conspiracy as well. These millions of dollars is nothing for this location. I mean, if it costs 10 billion just to rebuild, $200 million is not even 10% of that. So it's this isn't a very good argument for conspiracy theorists to use at all. But yeah, while we're on the topic, I'll go into number 13, which is actually, funny enough, the asbestos cost theory. Um, I actually didn't know this was a thing up until um, I had brought it up to my siblings, and one of my brothers had mentioned this. So this was one of the early ones that I kind of, looked up out of all of them. The amount to fix this was actually less than the precious metals. There's a link in there that the shows that the Port Authority had lost a lawsuit which they wanted the insurance to pay for asbestos removal on the entire World Trade Center compound. So that would mean all of these buildings, the whole thing would cost um, $600 million to remove existing asbestos out of every single building. Um, Actually, it's $600 million for the World Trade Center and other metropolitan area. So not even just here, just a large area, swath of area. Um, of the total, only $200 million was for the actual World Trade Center complex. So that would be the 7 buildings. So only $200 million wouldn't be a reason to destroy two massive buildings in the heart of the nation. It's a bad theory. And also, I think people fail to realize how prevalent asbestos was in the buildings too. Asbestos was banned in the 70s. Um, so only really the first 40 floors of the two towers had asbestos. 40 floors out of 110. So just to give you a perspective on that. And I linked, or not linked, but this picture right here kind of shows you. Um, that they had partially had the asbestos covered just so it wouldn't be able to, be released or cause any cancers. Um, they just sprayed on top basically, but I don't know where people get this theory of the asbestos from as being like a proof that it was a grander conspiracy, but here we are explaining it. So, number 14, I have titled Iraq Conflict Theory. Um, I just want to preface that there's no doubt that Bush definitely wanted to go to Iraq and get Saddam Hussein. Since, the Iraq conflict began kind of with his father when his father was in office and was unresolved. But I also agree that Bush, he definitely used the 9/11 attack to get in and fight in Iraq, for the WMDs and all that. He used it as basically a proxy to kind of um, enter and get kind of political influence to kind of start the war. Um, but I don't, although I agree with that, I'm not going to agree on the wider theory that Bush did 9/11 in order to do this. I don't know why it's not plausible that he just used this to get his own, favor in there, or not favor, you know, but just get it pushed in so that they could do it. I linked this, or not linked, but I attached a photo from an article that I found for polling. Um, and it basically shows that there was kind of a mixed response after 9/11 to, the war. Younger people didn't really want it, but um, I would have to look more deep into the polling and all that to see how accurate it was. But I mean, if half of the country's kind of siding with it, according to this poll, then it seems like it's a fairly widespread, you know, sentiment between the voting base. So, um, yeah, it's just I don't really know what to say to that one because although I agree that he used it, you would have to prove to me that he did everything else, which then you basically lose me because I'm, debunking the rest of it. So I also have on my, on my research, kind of a little note about, the Tucker Carlson video. Don't mean to bring him back into this, but I am. He uses a clip of McCain telling Bush that he should be ashamed of himself as a proof that Bush was smearing McCain during the Republican primary, so he would lie about anything. Is basically what Tucker Carlson said in the video. That Bush is untrustworthy. He'd do anything to get what he wanted, and he wanted to be in Iraq. So he did 9/11 to get into Iraq. Is all of Tucker Carlson's claim in the first episode. Um, Not only did Bush not spread the rumor about McCain having a bastard black child, um, which was the smear campaign during the time. I guess that's a thing. I was a baby, so I don't really know if that was prevalent, but I couldn't find anything proving Bush said it. And also the clip that he used, which I linked right here to this video of the Republican primary, where McCain is telling Bush he should be ashamed of himself, had nothing to do with the bastard child. It was McCain referring to a speaker at one of Bush's, events, his voting events, um, that claim that McCain gave up on veterans, which he took offense to. It's actually at the 17-minute 45 seconds to 18:37 mark. So um, you can go ahead and check it out. It would be number 61 right there. Sorry, editing my document at the same time. But yeah, number 61, you can go ahead and take a look. Um, so like in that was basically the first 40 seconds of Tucker Carlson's video. So he's already basically lying about facts and changing history. And, you know, this is why I say these conspiracy theorists that get a lot of traction are just unreliable simply because I could make a 10,000 word paper or 10,000 words like research project for every little lie that I find. And it's not only time consuming, but it's just at what point do you say too many lies kind of, you know, invalidates the speaker, if that makes sense. So, yeah, my next point, it's kind of going to be a longer one. Um, this will be the 15th point, I believe. Sorry, you know, I'm coming back, recording this after a couple days, so I kind of forgot. But um, yeah, I titled this one Jersey Girls or the Jersey Widows, and this one will specifically um, relate to the second Tucker Carlson video. And I don't want to, go into every single video, and I'm not going to. I watched three out of the five, I believe, and you kind of get the gist after a while. But so yeah, um, basically, there's five widows that were pretty famous during the time of 9/11. Um, what is it? Five? Oh, maybe four. Four widows. It would be Kristen Breitweiser, Patty Casaza, Lori Van Ucken, and Mindy Kleinberg. So basically, all of them complained that there was not sufficient information or research into the tragedy, and they wanted answers. So this basically pressured the U.S. government to create the 9/11 Commission. Um, but then once the report came out, uh, the group basically didn't like the findings, I guess. Um, and conspiracy theorists love to use specifically these girls as if they would have any, you know, more accurate information than someone else. Like you could have a investigator who makes a comment, stating that it was, a terrorist attack and this is that, and they'll find any reason to discredit them. But then you get these four random widows who are just believing conspiracy theories, and they take them at their word. So it's just kind of, you know, ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, you know, there are other victim family members who agree with the findings of the commission report and the NIST report and all that. So I don't know why Carlson specifically uses her as a way to, prove that it was some sort of inside government workings. But yeah, so I linked an article published on 11/19/2004 with a quote from, you know, this lady whose name is Deborah Burlingame. Her brother basically, passed away on one of the planes that was targeted. It was actually the Pentagon plane. So, yeah, she basically criticizes the Jersey Girls. And, a quote that I pulled directly from the article is, you know, the Jersey Girls criticize President Trump, or President Trump, imagine. President Bush because he wasn't rounding up Arabs in airport lounges after September 11th. And these are the same people who are now decrying the use of the Patriot Act. So they're they're just pointing out hypocrisy, from the Jersey Girls and kind of how they acted. So that would have been number 62 right there. But yeah, I mean, so the Tucker Carlson interview basically uses one of the ladies, Kristen Breitweiser. She claims that Dick Cheney uh, didn't want any information getting out because of re-election. And Carlson also claims that Dick Cheney told the Senate Majority Leader at the time, Tom Daschle, to not get any, leaders of war to testify because they would be busy, you know, basically with the, heading into Iraq, um, and to not implicate them to interfere with the war effort. And Carlson specifically uses a Newsweek article that I couldn't find anywhere. So I've complained about this before, but Carlson also doesn't use basically any sources. If you ask any conspiracy theorists for their sources, I'm pretty sure within minutes you'll realize that they're kind of, full of crap. You know. But yeah, I mean, the best link I could find was a CNN article. would be number 63 right here. It's dated, January 29th, 2002, which states that Bush and Cheney did ask um, to limit the search of federal agencies that could have allowed the terrorist groups to occur, which basically means only like FBI, CIA. They didn't want, wartime generals or any of that to be affected because obviously, as I said before, Bush wanted to go to Iraq. Um, but I just find it ironic that they use this argument because, the Senate Majority Leader, Tom Daschle, disagreed with it and still did a full investigation. So this conspiracy doesn't even help them. Um, but yeah, they Carlson and her also, claim that the FBI was intimidating people and being hard on the investigation. Yeah, I don't know really where they get that from. They don't say it too specifically, but I believe it was like a, or maybe I'll go into it later. But yeah, I'm not sure. It was something about the way that they were interviewing them or something, and it was hot. It's basically their argument, but yeah, I don't get it too much into that one. Carlson specifically uses that the budget was small and that the timing of the investigation was proof that Bush didn't want it to be investigated. He basically uses a type of misinformation here about the budget being only, a portion of what it really was. So he's citing the initial budget. Um, he says there's only $3 million and they had 18 months to find uh, to get through their investigation. So Bush did approve initially on 11/27/2002 a $3 million budget, which gave them until May 27th of 2004. So yeah, 18 months. This was only the initial budget though. It was, increased following a slow start in March of 2003, and it was increased by 11 million. And the general consensus, if you look it up on your own, is that the total budget was somewhere around $15 million. Um, and Carlson tries to use that it's not much money when you compare it to Washington standards, quote unquote. I don't really know why he uh, makes a comment for Washington standards. I'm not really sure how much he thinks is sufficient for the report. Um, he tries to compare it to Monica Lewinsky's investigation, um, being a larger total budget, but he bases the cost difference on the initial amount, not the total. And then he also tries to use the Robert Mueller Russiagate investigation budget as well, but that's, how are you going to compare it to something 20 years later? I mean, the budget's going to be bigger, costs go up. That's basically the rule of the road. So, yeah, um, I question this theory for the following. If the commission had a longer timeline off the rip, the first initial approval, I guess this is speculation, but I would see conspiracy theorists saying that they had too much time and they hid the investigation as well. So it's basically, between a rock and a hard place. You do or you don't. There's no winning with these people. But yeah, the links that I had would be 64, 65, and 66 on these if you want to go check them out. And then another thing on this one, they really claim that Kissinger is untrustworthy. They have a big whole section on that. Kissinger was the first choice for the commission report, and then he got replaced. So I'm not sure why they even care. Um, you know, oh, this is where I get into it. So this is where they tried to say that intimidating people, because she got called into a room with Kissinger and it was hot because it's an interrogation tactic. Um, and it could just be that she was nervous. I mean, I don't know why they would say that. She also says that one of the widows asked if Kissinger had any Saudi royals as clients, and he apparently didn't answer and somehow ended the the talks with them, which sounds like just like not a real series of events. It's like out of a cartoon book, but yeah, and you can't prove her testimony in any way, but you know, he never stayed on. And I looked it up. There's a here I linked an article, this Democracy Now article. Kissinger admitted that he never had any direct Saudi royals as clients, but his law firms did have clients who had businesses in Saudi Arabia. Um, like I don't know how you prove that he didn't answer that or that he did have a connection even though he didn't. Like they're just throwing out, you know, conspiracies. Every little thing is somehow you can construe it so that someone was unreliable, someone had a certain connection. It's the same as the same thing every time with these theories. Number 16 I have on here is titled Insider Trading Theory. Um, this theory basically goes along with that entities knew ahead of time that there was some sort of advanced knowledge of the attack. And in turn, there was a significant amount of insider trading. Not only did the 9/11 Commission report find absolutely no connection to the attacks, and then on page 516 of the Commission report, um, right here, number 79. Um, but the report also lists that the SEC, FBI, and other federal agencies found nothing for insider trading. Um, People cite that there was a large volume of put options made to the parent companies of American Airlines and United right before the attack. Um, just to preface this, if someone uses this as a conspiracy theory, I have three questions that you should ask them right away. Do you know what a put option is? How much money was made from the options after the attack? And how many traders made these investigations? Slash, how are they all in on it? Um, so yeah, I can address these. A put option is basically an investment that bets on a stock losing value. Um, and it is kind of true that there was quote unquote unusual a large amount of options taken out right before. It wasn't directly right before, but people believe that it actually happened a week before. Or people believe it was like the day before. It wasn't. It was actually a week before. And most of it, meaning 95% of it, came from one trader, which was a private investment firm. Um, it was made. The put options were made on September 6th, 2001, so about a week before. Um, and the same investment firm hedged their, put options, meaning they bought stock later on to hedge their loss in case the put option didn't work. Um, by buying 115,000 shares of American Airlines the day before the attack, um, which means they lost money because they bought those and the stock fell. Um, Really, this one comes from a testimony from one of those widows I mentioned, where they were claiming that there was $5 million in unclaimed money from investments would prove that there was some sort of insider trading. I can't find this anywhere. I don't know where they get this unclaimed money from. Um, but I can't even believe it's almost comical hearing that it's $5 million is what they're um, claiming uh, is the reason for this. But yeah, I linked some hearing information right here, number 68. You can go ahead and check that out if you want. And I'm just gonna go right into number 17. We're starting to get to the end, so these are a little bit shorter. This one is the five dancing Israelis, Israeli tourists laughing theory slash Israel and Jews must be the culprit for any and all problems. Um, yeah, I mean this one is just kind of crazy. I guess some Israeli people were celebrating or filming or something. Um, and people are trying to say that they must be Mossad or some Israeli intelligence agency who planned the attack and knew it happened and were celebrating. And I just like if you think they're Mossad agents, then these guys have to be the dumbest Mossad agents on the planet because you got caught dancing and then arrested, and that would be how your cover is blown. Like this is just comical. This isn't real. There's also a portion of it comes from, at least from what I found. I haven't heard anybody say this, but I'm basically thinking for the conspiracy theorists now. Um, I might have seen it somewhere actually. Now that I'll correct that, but yeah, basically one of the terrorists, Zaid Al Jarrah, who was on United Flight 93, probably butchered the name, had two uncles who were spies in Syria, and at the time had links to the Mossad. Here's a PDF that you can check out, number 69, if you want to. But it doesn't make any connection to his nephew in any way, so I don't know. People just think it's like a huge web that they must untangle, but yeah, this dancing Israeli one's just kind of weirdly anti-Semitic, and I just don't know how to feel about that. But yeah, um, number 18 I have called Black Boxes Unrecovered. For some reason people think none of the black boxes were recovered at all, so it must have been a government cover up. You know, two of them were recovered, Flight 93 and Flight 77, which will be the Pennsylvania one and the Pentagon one. These were recovered because a tower didn't fall on them. So it was pretty easy to recover those. A black box is not designed to be just demolished underneath rubble. If the plane crashes into the floor, it'll survive. But number 19, I have titled Thermite uh, in Construction Debris. Um, the theory basically comes from one Brigham Young University professor, Stephen Jones. He published a paper on September 22nd, 2005, which I've linked below, um, on what he believed was proof of thermite material in the debris of a 9/11 tower. Now, just to preface this, he did not publish this in a normal way that a scientific paper would be published, where there's extensive peer-reviewed, you know, work done prior to the release. He posted it on his department website at the university, and then published it in a Journal of 9/11 Studies, which he co-founded and co-edited. So the crux of his argument is that some iron oxide chips were found in the debris, and this only comes from the product of a thermite reaction. And following Black backlash, he also changed it to not be a regular thermite reaction, but actually a nanothermite reaction because people disproved that it could have been regular thermite. Um, Normal thermite not only takes a long time, but also would need to be positioned in a way to have direct contact to all of the beams, and would need a substantial amount of thermite just to cut through one beam. The idea of regular thermite was disproved by several researchers. Um, and these researchers not only disproved it was regular thermite, but the iron material he claims can only come from the thermite reaction is not true. It's actually a pretty common material. It could have come from a wide array of debris. It could have been how the debris was handled or removed. Could have which could have been from blowtorches or contaminated from someone who cleared the rubber, who had this iron oxide on them. So him making the assertion that it was thermite is kind of ridiculous, especially for a scientific scholar to do that without any peer review. Um, I linked below several YouTube videos as well. Um, for the first one, um, I linked was a guy trying to get thermite to melt through steel. It not only doesn't work, but he used really thin steel, not like the support beams for the World Trade Center. Um, and you can see on YouTube videos of people trying to prove it works, but in all the examples, they used a relatively thin material. The World Trade Center, had beams with the thickness of a quarter to 1 inch thickness of steel, which is pretty strong, like material. It's not it won't be really thin. Um, yeah, that would be link 77 right here for the video. And additionally, if you're looking at all the videos when they burn holes in steel using thermite, the chemical reaction is pretty volatile. It's pretty loud, bright, and uncontrolled. And people try to point to, you know, little explosions or puffs that prove that it was thermite, but it doesn't look the same if you really, watch the videos. So, um, yeah, it's this thermite one. It's been a pretty prominent one, but it's usually based in, you know, not having seen what a thermite reaction really looks like. So, yeah. So, in conclusion, I just want it to be known that this whole video and even, my document, it's not me saying that conspiracies don't happen, but in the history of the world, when conspiracies have been proven, they always have some sort of evidence to prove the conspiracy. So, for example, Nixon spying on the Democrats was found because of Watergate, um, and then his office was forced to release documents and recordings that proved that Nixon was acting illegally. And then, another one, the NSA spying on Americans was not known, but theorized for a long time, and then Snowden released classified documents showing that they were. These conspiracies were proven by the information that was leaked or by whistleblowers, or any number of real concrete evidence to prove the theory was correct. But, in the case of 9/11, at no point can any solid concrete evidence be proven to say that the government or any foreign entity besides Al Qaeda was at fault or even connected in any way. So, yeah, I just hope this video, is some food for thought. I hope you check out both reports. I doubt many people have even read excerpts of the NIST report or the 9/11 Commission report, but yeah, if you read it, you would see that a lot of it kind of follows what we thought and what was found. So yeah, this is my first video, so it's kind of a work in progress. The whole format. I don't know how I feel about it. I'll see how I feel about it later. But yeah, I've got ideas for some other videos that I kind of want to try and make. I'm interested in. I saw recently Kim Kardashian actually thing that said that she didn't believe in the moon landing, so that's kind of interesting to me. Also, JFK, although I did find a pretty good video on the JFK one, so it feels kind of redundant to do that. I might just link you this professor. His name's Sean Munger on YouTube. You should check him out.